The Kings stand pat. We'll talk about the Kings, the NHL trade deadline, and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, the 2024 NHL trade deadline has come and gone, and it's now time to recap all the moves made by the deadline for your LA Kings. That will conclude our recap of the moves made by the LA Kings at the trade deadline. They did nothing. Literally nothing. Now, depending on your point of view, that's either ridiculous, bad, good, or it doesn't matter. Such is the fun and ridiculousness of the NHL trade deadline. Ridiculous because for the Kings, you're a niche team in a major market, and you kind of need to be doing something when the opportunity arises to grab some headlines and make some news. It's bad because every other team the Kings are competing against for playoff positioning or will be competing against in the playoffs did something to seemingly make themselves better. Maybe it's good because the Kings weren't in a position to do much anyway, and there's no need to give up assets for the future in a vain attempt to compete in this arms race. Or maybe it doesn't matter because this Kings team isn't going to do anything in the playoffs anyway. For me, I'm leaning towards bad. While GM Rob Blake has his many detractors, I do prefer my GM to be bold. God knows he was with the PL Dubois trade, and look how that's turned out for what it's worth. But I'd rather go down swinging and missing than just standing there. Now, that doesn't mean you do something stupid, but you do something. We're going to talk specifically about some of the deals that the Kings may or may not have been involved in, and we'll also react to Rob Blake's very brief press conference after the deadline on Friday. Let's start, though, with Tyler Toffoli, a major topic on Thursday's show. We had heard that the former Kings Stanley Cup winner could be headed to LA, and the price was apparently a first-round pick and an A or B level prospect. Now, I said I was willing to part with a late first-round pick. I know a lot of people probably wouldn't agree with that, but I was fine to do that. But I was definitely not high on including a high prospect. Now, I don't know exactly who that would have included, but Laferriere, Turcotte, Spence, Foggy Mo, even Kaliev, I wouldn't have included with the first-round pick. In the end, Toffoli went to the Winnipeg Jets, and he did not go for a first-round pick or a or B level prospect. He went to the Jets for a second-round pick in 2025 and a third-round pick in 2024, and New Jersey retained 50% of his salary. The Kings don't have second or third-round picks in 2024, but they do in 2025, and I absolutely would have shipped off those two picks in exchange for Tyler Toffoli and not paying half his salary. So I don't know why Rob Blake decided not to go in on that, but he didn't. There were reports the Kings had a deal to land last year's Vezina Trophy winning goalie Linus Ullmark from Boston, but that Ullmark killed the deal because he has a no-trade clause and didn't want to come out west. Multiple reports have since debunked that initial report that they claimed that LA was not involved in the deal for Linus Ullmark. Hard to comment on this one because we don't know how close the Kings may have been, what a possible deal was they had on the table, but the Kings apparently were not in on the Linus Ullmark deal, did not agree to a deal with Boston and then have the player kill the deal. Now, I said on Thursday's show, if I was Rob Blake, I would have traded defenseman Matt Roy. But I didn't think the Kings would do it, and they didn't. I thought forward Arthur Kaliyev, who has not played much of late, seems to have fallen out of favor with the coaching staff, both Todd McClellan and now Jim Hiller, and himself looking for a change of scenery. I thought he would get moved, and he wasn't. So Rob Blake had a press conference today after the deadline. I was not able to attend, unfortunately. My work schedule, I work nights, I sleep during the day, and then when I wake up in the afternoon is usually when I do this show, or if I have things to do, I do them and then do the show. Anyway, so I watched it on YouTube. Maybe you did as well. And now I assume the Kings posted the entire press conference. They usually do, but it was 4 minutes and 31 seconds. And he wasn't really asked about anything at the trade deadline. They asked him about injuries. There was talk about, was the plan all along just to kind of wait for the players to return from injury? There was a question about salary cap space in the deadline. They asked him about Jacob Movarar. They asked him about the 11-7 setup that's Jim Hiller's using. They asked him about Quentin Byfield. They did ask him about Matt Roy, and he did confirm that they had no plans of moving him and that there's no plans to sign him now, that all that is going to come up after the season. And he was asked a question, something about competing in the arms race out west, and he just basically didn't answer that question at all. Nobody asked him specifically about Tyler Toffoli. Nobody asked him specifically about Linus Ullmark. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how those questions aren't asked, but they weren't. At least that's as far as what we were showed on the YouTube interview. So very strange, very strange. I wasn't there, and I'm not throwing stones at anybody that was, but if I was there, I think I got to ask him about Toffoli or Ullmark or how close he was to making any trades. I mean, I think the answer was probably not close at all. And he did say something about we were never planning on taking away from the team in one of the earlier questions he answered. But yeah, there was not much meat to chew on from the Rob Blake press conference after the trade deadline. All right, so you want some good news? Injury update. It looks like Adrian Kempe and Mikey Anderson are going to return soon. They were both on the ice today on Friday wearing the red non-contact jerseys, but they are skating with the team. And typically when we've seen that earlier in the year, that means that a game or two, and then they should be back, or I should say, I guess, to go through a practice or two and then be ready to return. It looks like they could both return in time for the Kings' upcoming road trip, which begins next Wednesday in St. Louis. So that is good news. Also, Victor Arvidsson, update on him. The earlier reports that we had heard, he was going to be back before the end of the season, appear to be true. That looked like he could return sometime in April. And Carl Grundstrom apparently would be the last player to come back from the injury. He's, as far as the players and where they are along in their rehab and recovery, but they do believe that he will be back before the end of the season. So good news on the injury front for the LA Kings, that those guys apparently will all be back in time for the playoffs. So all in all, when you look at the trade deadline, for me, I will say I'm disappointed. I'm certainly not furious. I'm certainly not surprised. I thought they might do something, but I didn't think they'd do anything big. I didn't think they had the ability to do anything big, but I'm certainly not going to stand here and pound the desk and call for Rob Blake's head. I know there seems to be plenty of Kings fans on social media, for what it's worth, that want to see the GM go. Once the season's over and we do an entire episode devoted to the job Rob Blake has done both this season and his entire tenure with the LA Kings, I think I'll have a more definitive opinion on what his tenure has been with the Kings overall. My general feeling, though, is without doing any really deep dive on it and kind of looking at a list and doing pluses and minuses, I think he's been pretty average. I think he's done some good things. I think he's done some questionable things. I think at times he's been bold. I think at times he's been passive. Like a lot of GMs out there, frankly. There are pluses and minuses with Rob Blake. I don't think he's been terrible. But he could be better. I would say ultimately, if I'm judging him right now, I would say he's an average general manager. And we'll talk more, obviously, when the season's over and how it ends up panning out for the team. And then judge Rob Blake again, have a full episode, really do a deep dive on the job that he has done and what his future looks like running the LA Kings. Now, the Kings did pull out a game against the Ottawa Senators. We haven't talked about that. We will do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Fresh every day, never frozen, chef-crafted, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Also, there are more than 50 add-ons to help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. Discover a wide variety of easy options for the entire day, like breakfast, midday bites, and more. Factor meals are ready to heat and eat, so there is no prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50. Use the code LockedOnNHL50 and get 50% off. That's the code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off. All right, the LA Kings played game 3 of their 5-game homestand. They hosted the Ottawa Senators. Real quick, I'll give you the lineup for that game against the Senators. And Arthur Kaliyev was inserted into the lineup for the LA Kings as they again had that 11-7 setup with the 11 forwards and the 7 defensemen. And Arthur Kaliyev drew in on that bottom line, if you will, with Blake Lizotte and Arthur Kaliyev. The rest of it was pretty much the same, although, of course, Jared Anderson-Dolan claimed off waivers, so no longer with the team, so he was not a part of that. Trevor Lewis was promoted, if you will, to the third line, and Cam Talbot would get the start in net in that one. Well, as far as a game recap, the Kings fell behind 1-0, giving up a power play goal in a very lackluster first period for the Kings. Again, down 1-0 after one. Second period, Quentin Byfield scores on a breakaway, doing a great job, stick handling with a bouncing puck and batted it into the net. His 19th of the season. Blake Lizotte and Vladislav Gavrikov with the assists. However, Ottawa would reclaim the lead up 2-1 going into the third. Pierre-Luc Dubois, though, would tie the game with LA on a delayed power play using the extra attacker to make it 2-2. Andrei Kopitar and Matt Roy with the assists. Jacob Moverar gets his first career NHL goal to make it 3-2 Kings, a shot that did deflect off an Ottawa player and into the net, but I don't think he cares. First NHL goal for him, a guy who was on waivers earlier in the week, stays with the Kings and scores a goal. And by all accounts, everyone talks about what a great guy Jacob Moverar is, and they were all very thrilled for him to finally get that first NHL goal. Unfortunately, the Kings would allow a goal with around 5 minutes left in the third, so we'd be tied 3-3 and going to overtime, where the Kings have not been good this season. However, a great individual effort from Kevin Fiala saw him net his 20th goal of the season in OT. Matt Roy with the assist. Pierre Dubois had a strong shift as well right before that to help keep the possession in the end of the Senators and eventually lead to the goal. And the Kings escape with a 3-2 overtime win. As far as the game stats in this one, LA gets the 4-3 win. Shots on goal favored LA 35-31. As far as the power plays go, the Kings didn't officially have a power play, but they did score that big goal with the extra attacker on the delayed penalty. Ottawa was 1 for 4 with a man advantage. Faceoffs were even at 30 apiece, so even though Ottawa is not a great team, the Kings were dominated in the faceoff circle in their previous game against Vancouver, so good to see LA get better in the faceoff circle, at least in the next game. They need to be better going forward. Block shots favored the Kings 23-19, and hits favored the Kings 29-15. Kings were bad in the first period, and this one came out as flat as a pancake. They weren't much better in the second period. Were able to turn it on in the third and overtime and pull out the victory. Now, that kind of effort on most nights is not going to cut it. It certainly won't cut it this Saturday against a good team like Dallas, but it was good enough to get the 2 points on Thursday. Bottom line is Kings will take it, but they need to be much better. That was not a great performance against the Ottawa Senators. As far as the 3 stars of the game, My number 3 star was the man who ended the game, and that was Kevin Fiala. I got to say, and I know he's played great of late, and we can't expect him to continue to be that red hot, but he was a non-factor for most of the game. Luckily, he did come alive in the overtime, and that 3-on-3 is certainly kind of tailor-made for a guy of his skills. Just a great individual effort. Made a spin move, shielded off the defender with his body. Now, he initially fanned on the first attempt, but was able to stick with it and put a backhander in. It did deflect off the stick of one of the Senators players, but still a great individual effort. So I'm going to give the 3rd star to Kevin Fiala. Quentin Byfield's my number 2 star. He was the one skater that showed up and played all 3 periods. And oh, by the way, if you this is worth a grin at least. Tim Stützle, the man who was taken 1 pick after Quentin Byfield in the draft, the man that everyone was always saying, oh, the King should have taken him. The King should have taken him. He was a -3 in this game and was robbed twice by Cam Talbot and was also on the ice trying to defend Kevin Fiala when he scored the game winner. So a little bit of, if you're a Kings fan and you heard a lot of crap about how they should have taken Tim Stützle, he didn't have a great game against the Kings, and Quentin Byfield did. And we talked about it at the time, and it's turning out to be absolutely true. When those 2 players were drafted, everyone said Tim Stützle was more NHL ready and he was going to have a better career to start. But in the end, Quentin Byfield would be the better player. And things are starting to trend that way. Now, Tim Stützle is still a very fine player. I'm not knocking him at all. But when you watch that game particularly, Quentin Byfield, who's still getting better, looked like a guy that's blossoming into being a star. And Tim Stützle had a tough night. But Quentin Byfield gets my number 2 star. And my number 1 star is Cam Talbot. And I know he allowed 3 goals. I don't care. He was amazing in the first part of this game. The Senators could have been up 3-0, 4-0 halfway through this game. He had one of the saves of the year, if you didn't see it, a diving save with his glove on Tim Stützle to rob him of a goal. He also had the first shot of the game was Stützle breaking in on net, and he made a great save on that one as well. He had multiple grade A high quality saves in this one. And I believe he absolutely deserves to be the number 1 star of the game. The Kings would never have had a chance to be able to rally and come back and win this game if it were not for the efforts of Cam Talbot earlier in the game. And I've said before, Cam Talbot just needs to be good. But if he can do those kinds of things, I know it's the Ottawa Senators. I know they're not one of the better teams in the league, but he had some elite saves in that game against Ottawa. Do want to give you a quote from head coach Jim Hiller after the game. Who said about the game, quote, I think we needed Talbs, talking about Cam Talbot, for the first 40 minutes. That was really important. We didn't play well. He kind of kept us in it, not just the obvious with that incredible save made. There were 5 or 6 before that. He gave us a chance to get our legs underneath us or get refocused, and I thought we played really well in the third, and of course, we liked the result. And that was Kings head coach Jim Hiller about that victory. Jacob Moverar, certainly great to see him get that goal. Kevin Fiala showing up late was great to see. But the Kings need to play better hockey than we saw against Ottawa. Again, 2 points is 2 points. I'll never look down my nose at that. But that was not the type of game the Kings, you're going down the stretch now. You're in the final 2 months of the regular season. You want to be playing your best hockey at the right time. And you want to be focused every night. And look, you're not going to win every game, most likely, but the game they played against Vancouver, that was a quality effort. That was an acceptable loss, if you want to call it that. You want to be playing your best hockey. The Kings were not in this game, so hopefully we'll see a bit of a wake-up call, see them play better against Dallas coming up on Saturday. I did want to check the standings, and this is going into the weekend. This does include Friday night's games. There weren't many. But the Edmonton Oilers right now, 78 points. They lost to the Blue Jackets Thursday night, 4-2. The Kings, meanwhile, with the 2 points, move up to 75 points. Third place in the Pacific. They're 3 points back of Ottawa for the second spot and potentially home ice advantage in a potential first-round matchup. The Nashville Predators have passed the Vegas Golden Knights for the number 1 wildcard spot in the West. Predators with 75 points. They beat the Sabres 4-2 on Thursday. Golden Knights lose to the Canucks 3-1. They've lost 7 of 8 and have fallen to the number 2 wildcard spot. Now they're going to make the playoffs. And I know they made some nice moves at the deadline, kind of the talk of the NHL with what they've done, putting players on long-term injured reserve and using their cap space. They've made some nice additions, but this team is trending in the wrong direction. We'll see if those additions turn them around. But right now, Vegas is the final team in a wild card spot in the West. Then you've got the Blues with 67 points. They lost to the Devils 4-1 on Thursday, and then the Kraken were shut out on Friday by the Jets 3-0. So the Blues and Kraken both have 67 points. So they're 6 points out of a wild card spot in the West. After playoffs start today, it would be the Kings against the Oilers, 2 versus 3 in the Pacific in the first round of the playoffs. Hey, it's a Feedback Friday with all that's been going on. We still need to check in on your thoughts on what's going on with the LA Kings. We'll check your emails next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning with recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed's partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Indeed Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of qualified candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March the 31st. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. LA Kings face the Dallas Stars Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of your LA Kings with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search LA Kings, and I will be at the game. If you want to say hi, you can reach out on social media, an email, whatever, and I'd be more than happy to say hello before, in between periods, or after the game. We have emails to get to, and because of all the news this week, we are kind of squeezing them in, and I will admit I had to kind of strip down the emails to kind of get to either the big comment or the big question, so I hope you'll understand that. We'll start with Jeremiah, the everydayer in Hawthorne. He says, do you think Rob Blake is done for good, or do you think the team can save his job if we get out of the first round? Go Kings, go. Unless the Kings completely do a pratfall and maybe get swept and look awful in the first round of the playoffs, I think Rob Blake is coming back. He's got 1 year left on his contract. If they play well and lose in the first round, I still have the feeling that he's going to be back next year, and that will determine whether he is extended or not. But I still, there's a chance that he could get fired again if it goes really bad in the playoffs. But I think he's going to be back for another year. Edwin in Brea, who hates dancing, says, wouldn't it be something if we have the Oilers for round 3 in the playoffs? Third time has to be a must win, because if they beat us for a third time, they are officially our daddy. One success in the playoffs, if we defeat the Oilers, would get the monkey off our backs. Thanks for all you do. Go Kings, go. Yeah, hopefully if that does end up being the matchup, the third time would be the charm. And that would do a lot to kind of erase what has been an interesting season for the LA Kings as far as some of the negative things that have happened. We talked about them, they talked about them advancing in the first round of the playoffs. If they can do it by beating the team that's beaten them the last 2 years, I think we'll be feeling a lot better about ourselves going forward. So hopefully if that is the matchup, that will be the case. We got an email from Sorrow. He had emailed the week before and he didn't include where he was from. So I think I said like he was from Santa Monica. He's actually in Washington, D.C. And he emailed again. This was before the deadline. And he says, my hot take, Blake is getting fired at the end of the year, no matter what, barring winning the cup. Well, yes. And ownership isn't letting him make any more moves. If Blake is the guy who isn't afraid to do the hard thing, then he needs to dump PLD's contract and trade Roy. I actually think we could get a big return for Roy. Well, obviously that neither of those things happened. And we just talked about Rob Blake's future. I do think if they win a playoff series and if they advance in the playoffs, I think he's definitely going to be back next year. Mike in Reno says, why doesn't Trevor Lewis get scratched every once in a while to give other younger players more ice time? That's fair, I think. Look, he's an older player. He's been okay. I know a lot of us are rolling our eyes when he missed that wide open net to win the game against Vancouver. But I agree with that. I think he's been okay, and I like him. And, in the playoffs, he's got that playoff experience. So I could see him in the playoffs, but I don't know why he doesn't get scratched every now and then, and let Arthur Kaliyev get in the lineup, or whoever else. They just called up Samuel Fagemo. Get him in the lineup every now and then. So I agree. I don't know why it seems like he can't be out of the lineup when it comes to the LA Kings. This comes from Austin in Romania. He's on deployment in the military. He said he thought our guest on Wednesday, Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News, was a bit too negative about the Kings' chances in the postseason. Austin said, we have a great PK and power play, and if Talbot stays consistent, easily a top 10 tendy. With Arvidsson and Kempe coming back, our offense will be even stronger than it is now. The team is going deep, I believe. Go Kings, go. I will say Austin Stanovich was a little bit more down on the Kings' chances than I was, but I don't think he said anything unfair at all about the Kings. And I get it that not a lot of people are going to pick the Kings probably to go deep in the playoffs, especially since they didn't do anything at the deadline. But if we get all these guys back and we're healthy, I think they're going to kind of go in loose and look into. I don't know. I don't have a bad feeling about the Kings. I really think that they could be a dark horse if everybody comes back healthy and we're playing the right way. I think they're going to be a tough out. So I'm not quite as negative as Austin was, but I think he's not saying anything that a lot of other people aren't saying, and I don't think he was unfair. But he was a little more negative than I would have been. Michael in San Diego wrote in complaining about the officiating against the Kings. He even sent me a screenshot of Kevin Fiala's jersey getting grabbed in the Vancouver game right before Fiala was called for a jersey grab, and it led to the Canucks getting the game-winning goal with the extra attacker. Yeah, that was definitely a missed call. There have been some calls that haven't gone the Kings' way, but every once in a while, I think we probably forget him. Andrei Kopitar threw the puck out of the zone and should have been called for a delayed game. And so that was one that went our way. So we tend to, as Kings fans, remember the ones that don't go our way, but you're right. That Fiala jersey grab should have absolutely been called. And we got one from Scott in Simi Valley. He says, talked about how Matt Roy is underappreciated and how we'll likely lose him and how we now have to pay Byfield and how the Pierre-Luc Dubois contract is hamstringing the team. And that's the one thing you can talk about. Pierre Dubois' play on the ice, but yes, the contract is the one thing that's difficult to swallow because it really has prevented the Kings from being able to do things at the deadline to help themselves. So it's one thing to criticize how inconsistent Pierre Dubois has been. It's another thing, though, if you're saying that contract is just too much for that player and it's having a negative effect on the team. And I think that's absolutely fair. We got an email from Marco. He lives in Costa Rica. He said he's a former LAPD officer and longtime season ticket holder. And he just wanted to say he's listening to the show and supporting the Kings from afar. And Marco, great to have you listening to the show. I know we have a listener in Ireland. I know in Japan and now Costa Rica. So if we have anybody out there who's listening in a unique place and wants to check in, love to hear from you. And also got a nice email from longtime Kings fan Bob in Santa Monica, or originally from Santa Monica, now living in Oregon. Just want to say, Bob, thanks for the email. Appreciate you supporting the show. That is going to do it for this show. Thanks to everyone who took the time to send an email. The email address, if you ever want to send an email, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. And as always, you can leave your comments on the YouTube episodes as well. Love for you to stay interactive with the show, following us on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings, go.